Welcome back to Words of the Wise. Today I have Deputy Chief Derby from Stoughton PD in Massachusetts. He has 17 years experience in law enforcement. Really looking forward to this conversation. So welcome to the show, Deputy Chief Derby. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Paige.
Of course. I want to first give a little bit of background. Who are you? How'd you get started? 17 years in law enforcement. What did that look like for you?
So I originally grew up in Delaware, and then after college, I joined the Coast Guard. I got stationed in Massachusetts. I met my wife while I was up here, and I took a couple of police exams, and initially was hired for a police department in the Metro West area of just outside the city of Boston. I did 7 years there as a patrolman, and then I had an opportunity to come over to Stoughton in 2015, and it was just a bigger, busier department with more opportunities. So I decided to make the move, and it's been great since I've been here. I've been able to be involved in a lot of different aspects, and we're a big enough agency to have opportunities, but small enough to be able to get involved in a bunch of different things. So it's been a great move.
That's awesome. I'm curious to know if you had a why. We talk about this a lot, and a lot of agencies are teaching this now to, recruits as they come in. Did you have a why for entering into this profession, something that's helped you along the way during the hard times?
Yeah, I mean, I think my original why was just I had two uncles that were police officers, and I had this memory of probably being 4 or 5 years old. And one of my uncles was a Delaware State Trooper, and he came in to the house dressed in his uniform, and I was like, man, that's what I want to do. And from that point on, I don't ever really remember wanting to do anything else other than to be part of the military for a period of time. So it's always been something I wanted to do. And the why I want to do it is because I know it sounds cliche, but this is a job where you really get to impact people's lives.
Yeah.
Sometimes in a positive way, sometimes in a negative way, depending on what the call's for. But we have a real chance in law enforcement to make a difference, make an impact. And I think more often than not, we're making an impact in a positive direction. Even if that means arresting somebody, you can still do that in a manner that leaves the person better than how you found them.
Yeah, I agree with that. I actually have never heard someone say that. And I don't know if we talked a little bit about my background, but my biological father was in and out of prison basically my entire life. He served a 6-year sentence. When he got out, he was in and out for another decade after. And I have this conversation a lot because I feel like it required a little bit of like a reality check and some tough love to get him finally to a point where he was like, I want a different path for myself. And I like that you said that sometimes it's in your way, you can treat someone in a way that maybe is a little bit of tough love, but it gives them that like wake up call that they needed to choose a different path for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, that's at the end of the day is, I mean, we don't want to have to keep arresting the same person over and over again. And unfortunately, that's the reality that there are people like that, but there's plenty of people that I've had to arrest that are, or charge them with a crime. And at the end, they shook my hand and said, I appreciate the way you treated me. I know I was wrong. And it ended up being a positive, even though it was negative for them because they had court repercussions that they had to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love that. And I also, I was talking to someone recently and they said that police trucks or police cars are not in the toy box anymore. And I actually like disagree with that a little bit. I think that there still are a lot of kids like you who like grow up like wanting to be a police officer, wanting to be in this profession. There's such a heart for service. And I was actually at a garage sale recently and they had like a little police officer hat, and so I still think that there are a lot of young people out there that want to be in this profession. And to your point, if you are doing the best you can to treat people in a manner that is respectful and you're not going to change their mind. They're always going to strive to want to be like you, and so you're setting that example to continue that drive for this profession.
Yeah, and that's really what we need because, over for a number of years, we know probably from 2014 to the early 2020s, police took a real hit in the public eye, But now I'm seeing the public in general's attitude towards us is differently. It treats us different. And then I also see, like, when we go to schools and we're interacting with kids, you hear a lot more kids say, "Hey, I want to be a cop when I grow up." And
Yeah.
I feel like there was probably a good, 6 to 10 years where that kind of had died away, and now it's coming back, which is positive because at the end of the day, the police aren't going anywhere. It's a necessary profession, and we need people that want to do the job.
Absolutely. And that must feel so good to go to a school and have someone come up to you and shake your hand and say, like, I want to be like you.
Yes, yes. And we have a program here where kids at like the school fair can win a ride to school in a police car. And we do it also for the fire department and the DPW. But you get the kids that come in, we give them a tour of the station, we give them a ride to the police station, from the police station to their school. And just the reception we get at the elementary schools, the families that are involved, it's all very positive, and it's hopefully planting that seed in people that either one of two things: hey, this is something I might consider doing when I grow up, or hey, the police aren't bad people. They're real people, and they see us in a positive light, and it kind of plants that seed of, the police are necessary, and we're not bad guys.
Yeah, it's a win-win.
Yeah,
Yeah. And I
absolutely.
know we talked a little bit, and I was hoping you could explain this because we know that across the country, recruitment is challenging. Maybe there aren't as many people, at least right now, that are, lining up for this career choice. And to your point, I think that that happened in the last, 5 to 10 years, and we kind of know around that time that that happened. And you used to have like a statewide test that you guys did that you went away with. Can you explain a little bit about what that was and how that has helped to improve your recruitment?
Sure. So for a long time, Massachusetts, well, actually, it's still in existence, the Civil Service Commission, and it's all civil service jobs, but they have a policing branch, firefighters, and so it was a statewide test that you would take, and then as an applicant, you could choose which department you wanted to actually apply for, and then based on a bunch of different things, whether you're a resident of that town, whether you were a veteran, how you scored on the test would determine where you were on the list, and then the department would be presented with a list from the Civil Service Commission, and then they would have to use that list to hire off of. And it had very strict rules. Is like if you only wanted to hire one employee, you could only look at the first and second people on the list,
Mm.
just based completely on score, not whether or not they would actually be a good police officer or not. So in the last few years, we started to see in Massachusetts a lot of departments choose to leave the civil service system and go what we call non-civil service departments, meaning that we run our own tests, we run our own promotional and entrance exams, and then we're able to set up how we want the hiring and the promotions to go. And it just gives us more flexibility. And we look at the scores, we look at the backgrounds, but we also look at the interviews, and we try and pick the people who are actually going to be able to do the job and fit into the culture of our organization, and that gives us a lot more flexibility, and so far it's working out for us.
Well, and you shared with me that you guys had double the applicants.
Correct. So like I believe on the last civil service test that we were part of, I think maybe 30 people applied to or took the test for the town of Stoughton. We just recently had a non-civil service entrance exam just for our department. And I want to say we had right around 70 people that showed up. A few more than that signed up, but 70 showed up the day of the exam, which so more than doubled what we were seeing in the past.
That's great. That's great. And, we know kind of the next steps. So, step one is recruitment and hiring. And then step two is retention. And so, a part of, retaining, we talk about this a little bit, is obviously wellness, which we'll get into, but also training and opportunities for growth. And you are really invested in training, firearms, defensive tactics, but you also incorporate wellness into your training. Can you explain a little bit about what you do and the success that you've seen there?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to measure the success, I think, sometimes, but we definitely do talk about or bring some sort of like mindfulness into the training. When we're talking at the range, getting people to breathe after they shoot whatever string of fire we have them shoot, to hopefully kind of ingrain that in them so that if they were involved in an officer involved shooting, they're learning to breathe, because we all know when you breathe, you think better, you make better decisions. So it's things like that where we've started to kind of incorporate that in there, and then a lot of times when we talk about our use of force training, we talk about, it's you have to be able to survive what you did both physically, but you also have to be able to survive it mentally and emotionally, and then also legally. And all those things can play a factor in when a police officer uses force. So we try and have those discussions ahead of time of, what does the research say? What do we know happens after uses of force? You're processing it, your emotional response to it, and then how do you survive the aftermath that comes after a serious use of force. So we try and incorporate all of that in while we're doing other training, so people are starting to think about it. So hopefully the first time they think about it is not after a serious use of force.
I love that proactive approach. And I have been preaching this for so long. Obviously, like I'm in the wellness space, but I do think that wellness and training go so hand in hand. And there's a really big opportunity there to infuse some of these things tactically so that we're not in a position now in a reactive state where, like you said, now it's after the fact. Now someone feels like they didn't do something right or they're broken or like whatever it is after the fact, So if we can say, hey, like these are tactical tools that are going to help you to perform better, to think better, and then also come back to your baseline quicker. And coming back to your baseline is resilience, right? It's like, how can you, after an event, whether you're up or you're down, come back to that baseline as fast as possible? And mindfulness is a really, really key strategy. Breathing techniques are obviously a key strategy. I always teach, and I don't know if you've heard this before, but I always teach regulate the breath is step one. When you regulate the breath, you regulate your mind. And then when you regulate your mind, you regulate your actions and your reactions to things. And you can say this in a more, I'll say quotes, like tough way.
Yeah.
It's still the same. Control the breath, control the mind, control actions and reactions. Your mind is going to go where your breath goes. So if your breath is erratic, your mind is erratic, right? And then your
Absolutely.
decisions are going to be a little bit more erratic. So how can we regulate as much as we can? Starts with the breath, and then it trickles down into your reactions and actions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I teach also at the academy level, and I try and hammer that in. Actually, when I'm done with this podcast, I'm going to an academy to teach tonight for their patrol procedures, and I'm sure that will come up because they'll be put in scenarios where their adrenaline, their heart rate's going to go up, and you have to remind them, take a breath. Break that tunnel vision by turning your head and actually see what's going on. And then it's amazing, especially when I see it at the recruit level. They're making all sorts of bad decisions, and then they take a deep breath, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I remember how to handle this call. And
Yeah.
so it's really, you're right on the point when you say our breathing controls our mind, and that controls our decisions and our emotions for sure.
Yeah. And it is challenging because a lot of times everything that's happening is in this like quick split second decision making process. But if the situation calls for it and you have that opportunity, I heard it explained in this way. And again, I think if you just put tactical in front of anything, it works. But they called it the tactical pause. I used to call it the power of the pause. But if you have the opportunity and the situation lends for it, and you have the time to take like that quick breath, that quick pause, that's really all you need sometimes, like you said, to get that clarity and be able to make effective decisions. You're not always going to have that, right? Sometimes it's like you are just having to go. And I think that's when you lean back on your training.
No, absolutely. I mean, if that's not something you're training on a regular basis, it was to say we rise to our we was it we fall to our training, we don't rise to our level of expectations. So, if you're not training that way, it's not going to happen when you're really faced with a real situation where you've been involved in a serious use of force or it's a serious call. So if we're not training it, it's just not going to happen. We
Yeah.
a lot of research that shows that.
Well, I really believe that if that wellness and training are going to start to meld together more, and I love that you're doing that, that you're putting together some wellness strategies into your training to make the training more effective, and then being more proactive on the front end of things. And then, of course, like there's always resources that we're going to need after the fact to be able to process those things and again go back to that. baseline level. But I love that you're front loading that, and you're putting two and two together. And I think that is what's going to change the perception of wellness, or break stigma around wellness, is if it's like, this is tactical training. Like, this is going to help me to be the best version of myself, to make the safest, most effective decisions, to be able to make it home, to be the best version of myself with my family. So I think that it's all intertwined, and I really like that proactive approach. Um, I want to kind of get your opinion on this because, when it comes to wellness, it's hard to get people to take action. And we talked about this a little bit. You said in the context of wellness, it's a little bit of a buzzword, but like, are you actually doing it? Um, how do you get people to be accountable and take advantage or take accountability for their own wellness?
Yeah, I mean that's something I think we all police departments struggle with. And it just comes down to someone has to make a personal decision to be healthy, whether they're a police officer or a civilian or a doctor, whatever it is that they do. We all have to make a decision as that our ultimate at the end of the day, our health, both mental and physical, is in our own hands. And I don't really have a great strategy to how to get somebody to make good choices if they're not. I mean, if they're not eating well or they're not exercising, other than just trying to set an example for them and say, hey, this is how it is. This is what I do. Talk about it. Talk about wellness. Talk about fitness. Talk about nutrition. Bring the training in. But at the end of the day, people have to make a personal choice, and either they're going to do it or they're not. Because I don't know, we can't force them not to go through the drive-through and get an extra value meal. I mean, that's just the reality of the job.
Where do you think the resistance is? Obviously, not everyone is resistant. There are some people who are really prioritizing it, but for those who you see who maybe are taking more of that backseat, inactive approach, where is it coming from? Is it stigma? Is it um, peer pressure? Like, what are you seeing on your end?
So I think on like the mental health side is probably the stigma that still goes along with it. And I think as a police officer, we build up some level of tolerance to, we don't recognize that what we're seeing every day isn't what most people are seeing. And this isn't normal to see the volume of bad stuff that we see as police officers. So I think we build up a tolerance to it. And so we just don't realize that, hey, other people don't feel this way, or other people don't lay in bed at night staring at the ceiling because of the tough call they were on at night, or that night, and then have to keep doing that day after day for a 30-year career. So I think the stigma of it and then the kind of tolerance that they build go a lot towards the mental health aspect. And then the fitness thing, I think fitness and nutrition, I think comes down to a lot of cops work a lot and they just don't prioritize the time to work out. And then the same thing with nutrition. They just don't understand that eating healthy really isn't that hard when when you're in the middle of a midnight shift and you're hungry and you go into the 24-hour convenience store, there's plenty of options that you can get. You can go for the bag of chips or you can go for the bag of, cashew nuts and a water as opposed to a bag of chips and a soda. And it's just kind of helping people realize that it's not that hard to eat well.
Yeah.
I
I
think that's
really
a lot of it.
I liked what you said earlier about, like, as a leader setting an example. And I think that you don't have to be in a deputy chief position to set an example. So anyone who's listening, I think everyone has that ability to prioritize themselves and people will start to follow. I always used to think about this. I had a partner back in the day that would not do anything I told them to do, right? If I was like, you should do yoga, they're like, nope, not going to do that. And I was like, well, you should eat healthy. And they're like, nope, not going to do that. So I was like, well, I'm just going to do those things. I'm going to prioritize me. And then sure enough, that person started following. And so I think that by setting that example and prioritizing yourself, there is a ripple effect that happens, and other people will start to see it. They'll start to see how you feel better, you look better, you are getting better sleep, and you're maybe losing a little bit of weight or whatever that is. And then they will then want to follow in those footsteps. So I think instead of forcing everyone or trying to get everyone else to do something, if you start with you, then people will follow you.
Yeah, and I agree with that. A good friend of mine works at another police department, and we worked together at the previous department I was at. and he's always been very in shape. He's always been like on point with his nutrition, and just watching him and the example he sets, there's a lot of things that over the years I've picked up, and there were small changes because I always thought of like, especially when it came to nutrition, as like this really hard thing, and you had to eat, white rice and bland chicken and
Mhm.
no real flavor. But then especially now with like social media, there's so many recipes out there for food that tastes really good but is not bad for you, and coming down to where you can prep meals for the week and eat pretty healthy, but you're also eating food that's tasty. And I learned that from my friend quite a bit. And it goes back to what you're saying about someone just setting an example. It wasn't really preaching to anybody. It was just, hey, this is what I'm doing. And every once in a while I'd be like, hey, take a bite of this. And you'd be like, oh, it's really good. And then he'd
Mhm.
explain how the nutrition went along with it. You're like, oh, okay, I can do this.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that, you know, I think that there's a certain level of education that has to happen, right? So, like what you're saying to me when you're like, I thought it was white rice and bland chicken. And then I learned through education that I could actually have meals that taste really good that are better for me. And so I think the first step is always going to be awareness. So awareness of like that you need to make a change. And I think that we need to start holding ourselves at a higher standard in general. At least like I think that's my personality is how can I be the best version of myself? And you can relate that to your why. And I say this all the time, your wellness why. Why is it important for you to be well? And it could be as simple as like, I want to be able to outrun anybody, or
Yeah.
like I want to, I want to, when I step out of my vehicle and people look me up and down, I don't want them to think that they can take me. There could be certain whys, but holding yourself at a higher standard, understanding like why is it important to you, having that awareness that maybe some things could change to make you better. And then step two is going to be that educational step. Figure out what you need to do. And then the third one and the most important, and we talked about this a little bit, I think is missing is the action phase, and actually doing the thing, which is easier said than done. I know that you guys have extremely busy schedules. You're juggling so many different things, family, work, friends, all the things, overtime, like all the things that you have to juggle. But how can you put into action things that are actually going to work within your schedule so you can create that consistency?
Yeah, and I think the other thing when it comes to fitness, like you're saying, busy schedules, but sometimes you could do a 10-minute workout,
Yeah.
something very, very short. Maybe it's not the best workout that you could ever do, but it's enough that you did more than it's better than doing nothing at all. And I think there's a lot of opportunities in our schedules to make that small window and just say, all right, I have 15 minutes. What can I do in 15 minutes? And grab a little bit of exercise. And just, I think it's like you said, it goes to the education. If you're not someone who's into fitness, you might not realize that 15 minutes is enough I mean, you could do a 15-minute workout and be absolutely smoked afterwards. And a lot of people who just don't understand fitness don't get that. So that goes to that education of, hey, what can I actually do with the time that I have?
Yeah, I love that you said that because I do think that there is this old idea that you have to work out for an hour and a half, and then you tell someone who's in law enforcement that, and they're like, I don't have that much time. But if you're like, well, you can do it in 10 minutes or 15 minutes, it makes it so much more accessible. And then it's not a burnout phase, right? Because I think a lot of times when we dive all into stuff, and it could be anything, it could be
Yeah,
fitness, it could be nutrition, whatever, wellness category if you go all in and you're like, I'm gonna meal prep all these things and like da da da, and then like a month later, you're like burnt out on it. And so it's like, how can you make things easier for yourself? How can you start small and then gradually increase from there? Uh,
yeah.
how do you think that, or I guess my question is, do you think that setting the example for wellness starts at the top in leadership and trickles its way down, or do you think it starts at the bottom and works its way up? What is your opinion?
I mean, I think being closer to the top of the organization, you should set an example and a positive one. But
Mhm.
I just think the department is made up of close to 70 people, and there's a lot of people in this building who are, we like to call them leaders without titles. They're just they're patrolmen, but they set the standard for how things are done on the shift, and they're professional in the way they carry themselves. It's the same thing for some of our officers that are they're patrolmen, but they're very into fitness. They're there to help other people. And so I think it's, the top should be setting the example, but it doesn't stop at the top. It can be at all different levels throughout the organization. And just anybody can set an example by doing the right thing, whether it comes to health and well-being or whether it comes to doing the job the right way. Like I said, leaders without titles.
I love that. I don't think I've ever heard that before. Leaders without titles. I think that that is such a empowering statement so that anyone feels like I can set an example. I can be a leader even if I don't have that official title yet. I'll say yet.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, I'm one person. I run the operations division here, but there's 50 patrolmen that work for me.
Yeah.
And they have a big say on how the department runs on a day in, day out basis. I can tell them what to do, but then it's up to them to actually follow, what the standard is for the department. So, it's very hard to lead 50 people who aren't willing to stick with the program. And the reality is that those leaders without titles help make sure that the people who maybe are trying to stray a little bit stay within what's expected of them.
Yeah, I love that. I wanted to highlight you guys a little bit and understand, what you guys are doing in wellness and what investing in wellness looks like for you. And I know that you also have like really kind of a unique, at least the first time I've heard of it, where you have like a unique situation where there's a number of towns that come together for some of the wellness stuff that you offer.
Sure. So we're part of what's called the Metropolitan Law Enforcement Council, which is made up of, I believe it's right around 42 towns and cities in the kind of metro area of Boston. And it's one of a number of law enforcement councils in the state. And they pull resources so that no one town has to have every resource. So we have a regional SWAT team, we have a regional motorcycle unit, regional canine unit, but also part of that is a regional peer support unit. So, and I don't know exactly how many people are involved in that unit, but they've been absolutely awesome. Every time we've needed to have a critical incident debrief, or we've had officers that have been struggling, they've been there to help us. And it's great because sometimes officers are hesitant to work with people within their organization and actually kind of tell what's bothering them because they know they're going to have to see that person the next day and for the next 30 years. But it's nice being part of a regionalized team. So if someone needs to talk to somebody, they can talk to a peer support trained police officer from another agency. And there's also clinicians that are part of that organization as well. And it's great because it's kind of like almost having a therapist in the sense that you can say whatever you want to your therapist, and then it's not going to be then spread around your department afterwards. And we have two officers that are assigned to the peer support unit. They wouldn't do that. They're not allowed to do that. And I know the type of people they are. They wouldn't do that. But there's always that fear. And I've heard people talk about that. Like, hey, I don't really want to talk to him because I'm going to have to see him again tomorrow.
Right. Yeah, no, and I've heard that across the board, people maybe not, I don't want to say not trusting, but I still think that there's maybe a little bit of fear,
Yeah.
in talking to people. And so, the more resources, the better. And so if there's someone else that they can talk to outside, in more of like a regional setting, at least it sounds like it's working for you guys.
Yeah, it's been great. And then, in addition to that, there's other organizations. The Mass State Police have a big peer support unit. Boston has a very established peer support unit, and they all work together. So if it's not a resource we have, they can usually get it from another organization in Massachusetts. So we're pretty blessed in this state. I feel like when it comes to peer support for officers.
Yeah. And I know we talked a lot about a lot of different areas of wellness. We talked a little bit about, the tactical side with mindfulness and breathing. We talked about more of the talk therapy through peer support, a little bit about fitness and nutrition. How have you seen financial stress impact officers?
I actually see it a lot more than I would like to see it. Um, this being a police officer is great because you can make a lot of money in these jobs. There's always opportunities for overtime or jobs outside of the organization. We have construction details here where police officers actually direct traffic at construction sites. So you could work, the maximum amount we're allowed to work in a day is 18 hours. So you could work 18 hours a day, 7 days a week in this job
Yeah.
And we have officers that do end up not maybe working that much, but they put a lot of hours in. And some of them it's great because they're doing it to save up to put their kid in college, or they want to put an addition on their house, and then they kind of rein it back in once they've met whatever financial goal they have. But I've seen a lot of officers throughout my career who they start to make good money, and then next thing you know, they're buying the motorcycle, they're buying the second house, they're buying expensive clothes, whatever it is that they're doing, and then they get caught in this cycle of I have all this stuff that I have to pay for, so now I have to work more, and then I work more, and then they just keep buying, and it's just a vicious cycle. And unfortunately, where they suffer is in their sleep, their fitness, their families, and it can just kind of be a downward spiral for officers if they get trapped in that work cycle where they're always chasing that next dollar because they want to, like I said, buy the new motorcycle or get the new tattoo sleeve or whatever it is that they're trying to do.
Yeah. It's really interesting that you say that because throughout my life, a really good gauge for me on how well I'm doing mentally is how much I'm spending on stuff.
Yep.
Um, and it took me a while to recognize that. I worked for a company, so it was a long time ago, but I worked for a company and I was making fairly good money and I never had anything to show for it. And I was like, what is happening? And what was happening was that I was really unhappy. I was unsatisfied in this career choice. Not saying that you guys are unhappy in the career, but this is what was going on with me. And so, in order to try to compensate for that, I was just spending all my money on clothes or useless things, honestly. I don't even know what it was. It wasn't even anything cool. Like, it wasn't like I was going on cool vacations or anything. It was just, I was just spending, spending, spending. And I recognized this earlier on in my life, and then I realized that the more I start to spend money, it's usually because there's something going on inside of me that needs to be addressed. Whether that's stress or maybe I'm unhappy in one area of my life. And so I'm curious if you think that it's that, if it's like, hey, like we need to spend more money because maybe like we're not dealing with some of the trauma or dealing with some of the stress, or if it's for show, or if it's just being young and not really having a lot of education on how to manage finances. What are you thinking is kind of the key like purpose for overspending?
I would say all the above. You
Yeah.
know, it's
Yeah.
we've all done it. We're stressed out. We buy something stupid on Amazon because we're chasing that dopamine hit of like
Yeah.
knowing it's coming and then getting the package at the door. Um, or like you said, we're just trying to chase away whatever is bothering us by thinking about, some material object that we've decided to purchase. And then I think, like you said, the young officer aspect of it, I think that's where a lot of officers get trapped in that vicious cycle of working too much, is because for a lot of officers, this is their first real job, or they're coming in from the military where they were making nothing while they were there. And now all of a sudden it's like, wow, I'm making six figures. And then they start to buy, and then next thing you know, they're just in that vicious cycle, and they've kind of made that what their life is based on, an inflated salary, and they're living either to their means or beyond their means, and then they're trapped in there. So one of the things we've done is, we have officers that graduate from the police academy. We bring them in for about a week and a half of administrative training that they need before they can start the field training process, taking them to the range, doing the medical training with them, going over our policies and procedures. But we actually have one of our officers was an accountant prior to becoming a police officer. So he comes in and does like an hour or two block with the newly hired police officers on basically financial literacy. And he talks to them about the town has a deferred compensation program, how that works, starting to put that money in now, how it looks if you put $100 a paycheck now over 30 years, how much money you'll have. And so we've started to kind of incorporate that with our newer officers, some financial literacy, and say, hey, don't go buy the brand new jacked up pickup truck just because you can, like, save that money and get the next model down pickup truck. We're not saying don't spend your money, but spend it in a way that it's going to be sustainable. We don't get ourselves into that loop. And one of the things that I see for the officers that get into that vicious spiral of working too much is then they start to get burnt out on the job. And that's when they start to get to the complaints and stuff on the street because they're working so much. They're never taking time to decompress. They're not sleeping. And then when they deal with somebody on the street who's being difficult, if they were arrested or they weren't stressed out about money, they probably would have responded in a more heads up way, but they let their emotions get the better of them because they're tired and burned out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it sounds like it has a direct impact on performance.
100%.
Because you're right. Like if you are not sleeping enough and you're not eating well and you're working different shifts and it it makes sense that it would impact your performance. And then you also said earlier that it impacts your home life.
Yeah, I mean, if you're working 16 hours a day every single day, picking up those overtime shifts all the time, or picking up the extra jobs outside of the police department, you're just not going to be home to see your kids. You're not going to be home to have those meaningful relationships with your family members. And I'm just my daughter is 18. She just graduated from high school, and it's just amazing how fast that time goes. And
Mhm.
I've been pretty involved in my kids' lives, but it just seems like just yesterday was day one of kindergarten. And so if you're not there, you miss out on a lot. And it's very easy to not have those meaningful relationships, which also are important because they're your family, but they're also, at least in my life, they're my support network.
Yeah.
My wife's a rock star. She's listened to many stories over the years of me complaining about whatever issue I had, or, and half the time she just listens and, she'll offer some advice, but most of the time she's just not nodding along. And that's been a huge relief for me. But if I didn't have a solid relationship with her because I spend time with her, it definitely would have negatively impacted my career for sure.
I heard something, and it kind of stuck with me. And they said, no one is going to remember the overtime that you worked, but your kids will.
It's true.
And
I've
I
heard
was
that as
like,
well.
wow, like, yeah, like your family will. No one
Yeah.
in your organization is going to remember that. They're not going to be like, oh, yeah, he picked up 30 days of overtime or, worked 18-hour days every day. No one's going to remember that, but your family will.
Yeah, no, 100%. And just I saw someone on Facebook, so I don't know if this is true or not, but it was like a meme, and they basically said by the time your kid's 18, you've spent like 90% of the time that you will have spent with that child, that person in their life. Because after 18, it's college and they start their own lives. And I was like, wow, that really kind of hit me hard when you think about it. You have that like 18-year window, and that's the prime time like in your career when you're working. And if you didn't, that 90% could be a lot of hours with your kid, or it could be very few hours. And once you miss that window, it's gone, because then they have their own lives and they're off doing their own thing. And now you got to hope to do the right thing by grandkids.
Yeah. What strategies did you use to be able to create that strong family unit so that you could maybe leave work at work and not let it affect your home life? Was there anything specific that helped you to create that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it was just like I said, my wife's been awesome, so she'll listen to me and kind of decompress. She's my best friend.
Mhm.
So she'll listen to what I have to say. I'm a lot of times when I come home, I go downstairs in my basement where my gym's at and work out, and I feel like a completely different person when I come upstairs. My previous police department, I had about a 45-minute commute back and forth, and that was kind of nice. Music on, just driving. Now my commute's about 4 minutes, so I don't necessarily get that opportunity. So I've kind of transitioned that into working out, or and then there's some days you just come home and it's like, hey, I need a minute. I need to go sit down and watch TV for 10 minutes, and then I'll come out and be involved in what's going on. But I need a minute before I'm ready to do that. And usually, if I don't do that, my wife will be pretty clear that, hey, you need to take a break before if I'm snapping at the kids or not being my best self at home. She's usually pretty quick to remind me, hey, you can do a little better than this.
Well, it sounds like the communication was really good between the two of you, and for her to hold you accountable, but in a healthy way of saying like, hey, like, you could be better, like maybe take a few minutes instead
Yeah,
of like reacting to that, like having that understanding of like, okay, maybe there's something that you didn't offload yet. So maybe
yeah,
you need that little separation. But I also really like that strategy of like, I go home and I just work out really hard for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever it is that I need to kind of let all of that out. And I think that that's another like quick and easy strategy that might make a big difference, and not everyone has the time to do, like we said, like a full hour, but if you can maybe do that, or maybe you can do some sort of podcast or mindfulness or breathing technique on the way home. Having open lines of communication with your spouse so that you guys are both in it together and you have strategies together that work for you to be able to, take those moments where you need to like reset.
Yeah. And one of the other things that I found is, especially the higher I've risen in rank, the less people you can talk to about things. Because a lot of the things that are bothering me are personnel issues or issues that can't be discussed with people who maybe when I was a sergeant or a patrolman, I could just reach out and talk to. So as I've moved up, having people with of similar rank that can kind of understand what I'm going through and be able to listen and give some advice, or sometimes just listen just so you can offload what you're talking about. I found that to be hugely helpful, especially in this position as deputy chief.
Yeah. I mean, I hear that a lot, that it's the higher you go, the lonelier it is. And, kind of to the point of you guys regionalizing a lot of things. I don't know if you've considered this yet, but I've heard a lot of different states that are regionalizing peer support for command staff,
I
or
believe that's being discussed.
executive level, like peer support. So to your point, maybe you don't feel like it's appropriate to talk to someone, who's, I don't want to say like below you, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah. You don't want to complain down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's nowhere to go up. And so like having that has been helpful for some other states I know that are putting that together. So maybe that's something that's coming in the future for you guys.
I believe my chief is actually working on a group that's trying to make that a thing,
That's
which
awesome.
would be beneficial. But in the meantime, there's plenty of other people in these positions, and it's just networking with them and finding someone you can trust that, has a good head on their shoulders, and then being there for them when they're having the bad day, or that want to talk something out. So it's good having that network, and I've definitely felt that more at the deputy chief level than I did at the lower ranks that I held.
Yeah. And I think that we really underestimate the power of just talking to someone about something, like getting advice, knowing that you're not alone, like being able to offload some of that stuff. And I know maybe historically it was a little taboo to do those things, but I think now it's becoming more and more common. And, regardless of what rank you are, having that ability to have someone you can talk to, someone
Oh,
that you trust that you can talk to.
yeah. And then the other thing, I agree with you. And sometimes that thing can be a therapist or a mental health counselor. And I really think that that stigma that goes around that is really unnecessary. And I had talked to about, I think it was like 2020, some stuff was bothering me at work and just a lot of things going on. And I finally was like, I got to talk to somebody. So I reached out and found a mental health therapist that was specialized in first responders, and had a couple conversations with her, and pretty regularly for a short period of time. And then afterwards, it felt great. But one of the things that I've done, and kind of going back to you talking about setting the example, is I've been pretty open about that with people and said, hey, it's not a big deal to talk to somebody. If you can talk to your priest and that works for you, great. If you can talk to your spouse and that works for you, great. But hey, if you need somebody who has an objective outside view, there's nothing wrong with going to a mental health professional and just saying, hey, this is what's bothering me at work. And they provide that outside perspective and give you some strategies on how to deal with it. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And it's actually probably, I shouldn't say probably, it is wrong if you're struggling that much or you're having that bad of a time if you don't take those steps, because that ripple effect of not taking the step to get the help you need can be devastating to careers, people's persons, their families, their relationships. So I've been pretty open about talking to people and saying, hey, it's no big deal to talk to somebody when you need to talk to somebody.
Yeah, I love speaking with leaders who are willing to be open and authentic and vulnerable about the things that they do, because I do think that that brings the walls and the barriers down. I also agree with you that therapy can be extremely helpful. And to anyone who's listening, sometimes you have to, it's almost like dating. Like sometimes you have to like go through a few people before you find someone that you resonate with. And so I would encourage anyone who maybe if they didn't have the best experience, or maybe you tried someone out and they didn't specialize in first responders, or maybe like you just didn't jive or mesh with them, try a few people, find someone who you do connect with in a way where you feel like you can talk about them, you feel like they understand you, and it might not happen the first time. And so I know that that's one of the things I hear a lot is like, well, I tried, but like I didn't like them, or I tried, but like they didn't understand me, and so I stopped. And so sometimes it takes, it's challenging when there's some barriers, but sometimes it takes like a couple people to go through. And then when you do find that person, it doesn't mean that you have to be with them forever. Maybe you are, but maybe
Yeah.
it's just a couple times, like you said. Maybe it's just a few times to like get it off your chest and feel better about something. Because the reality is you guys see things that are not normal, and the reaction that you're having is completely normal. And so being able to normalize that from a leadership level, to make it more safe and comfortable for other people to reach for those resources, I think is great.
Good. Yeah, it's beneficial to me, and like I said, I've never been shy about telling people, but I also understand some people don't want to talk about it, and that's fine too. It's as long as people are getting the help they need, share it, don't share it, just do what you need to do to make sure that you're the best that you can be for this job, but more importantly for yourself and for the people that you love.
Yeah. What advice would you give to someone who's earlier in their career? Maybe something that you wish you would have known, maybe something that you've learned along the way, or something that's helped you.
Yeah, I think, and we had talked about this before, and so I've been thinking about it, and I think it really comes down to me. I wish earlier on I would have realized don't sweat the small stuff. And also don't take things personally, even when they're meant to be personal against you.
Mm.
In my first department, I had some bosses that I was kind of at odds with, and I felt like they were kind of going out of their way to make my life miserable. And maybe they were, and who knows? But I took it very personally at the time, and it didn't affect them, it affected me.
Mm.
And I wish that I would have realized that. And the same thing on the street when someone's yelling at you because they're upset about whatever situation they're dealing with. They're not yelling at me, Nate Derby, the person. They're yelling at this badge that's on my chest. And so I don't have to take what someone does personally, even if they mean it personally towards me. I don't have to take it that way. And I made that mistake early on in my career. So I kind of feel like don't take things personally and don't sweat the small stuff. There's a lot of things in this job that are minor inconveniences, and it's not worth really burning any emotional capital worrying about things that just aren't important. Because there's a lot of things in this job that are important that are worth thinking about. I've wasted too much time thinking about things that weren't important.
I really love those words of advice. And it kind of hit home for me too, because I think that I have definitely wasted a lot of my life worrying about the small stuff and sweating the small stuff and taking things personally.
Yeah.
And so I really appreciate those words of wisdom. Thank you so much for being here and coming on the show. That's all I have for you, but if we missed anything, I'll give you the floor to kind of wrap up, but thank you.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed our conversation, and I think we touched on a lot of different aspects of wellness and just policing in general. And so I really appreciate what you're doing, getting out there and spreading the message about both mental and physical well-being. So thank you for what you do, and thank you for having me on your podcast.
Yeah, of course. We'll keep in touch for sure.
Okay, thanks, Paige.
Thank you.